Scholars and Shakes. We're here with Dr. Kate Haffey, Emily Kaiser, and Elizabeth Vinto, and we have our coffee, acai bowl, and smoothie, and we're ready to...
So hitting all the, every part.
Yeah.
Love it.
Love it.
Great time. Alright, should we dive right in?
We should dive right in.
Okay, so just to start with you and your background and your education, so you do have a Bachelor of Science from Ohio University, Master of Arts from Marquette University, and then a doctoral degree from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. So you've been through all of them, which is so fantastic, and you specialized in modern British fiction, contemporary British fiction, queer theory, methods of advanced literature studies, and you also teach senior seminars on Virginia Woolf and Bloomsbury groups. Am I saying that right? So lots of things to talk about. So that's just kind of who you are. Did you want to start with any questions?
So we have a few questions that we've prepared, and one that's interesting is, can you describe your research in 3 words?
3 words. Well, the research that I'm currently working on, I would describe, the 3 words would be queer, friendship, and can I have a compound word with hyphens?
We'll allow.
20th century British literature.
I like it.
Yes.
So what made you, why the 20th century? Just because it's obviously very specific.
Well, when you're in grad school, you basically get a period and a area of the world, literature written in English, and generally it's either British or American. Mm-hmm. And really for most of my studies, I focused on both. I did what was called transatlantic and thought about kind of the connections across the world, because in the 20th century, there isn't the same sort of divide between different parts of the world because of globalization and people were reading each other. But I ended up working on 20th century British literature probably because I'm obsessed with Virginia Woolf. And if, a lot of my early research was on Virginia Woolf, and so when I was looking for jobs, I was much more qualified for the jobs that had to do with the 20th century British literature, because in most universities, they divide it you do early American literature or contemporary American literature, and then with the English literature, it's very much every 100 years. And so I've done more than that, but that's just kind of how departments are organized. But yeah.
Oh, interesting. I obviously have not been through a master's program, so I was just interested in how that worked.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of your dissertation, so that was in the intersection between sexuality and time in the 20th century literature. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, actually that is the book that I currently just finished. I'm in the very final process of... Thank you. Yeah. I actually have to hand in my proofs on Thursday. I'm just copy editing, so everything else is done. But that project started as my dissertation, and basically in the last, I'd say 20 years, people who have been studying sexuality have noticed that the way that we organize our life narratives is very often through these stages that we go through, where it's okay, as a young child, you imagine yourself going to school, going through adolescence, and then there's this kind of idea that your life will take a certain path. And historically, that's often been courtship, heterosexual marriage, reproduction, and it's been very kind of focused on being part of the nuclear family. And so for people who do not identify as straight, or people who do not want a couple, they kind of are outside of that temporal framework. Very often, especially until the last 5 or so years, marriage wasn't legal for LGBT individuals, and so there were lots of kind of life narratives that were outside of the norm, and as such, how people imagine kind of moving through a life was very different, and this kind of had effects on the way that time was represented in literature. And so I looked at the ways in which that came together in some of the most prominent 20th century novelists like Virginia Woolf or T.S. Eliot, who writes poetry but also is very interested in time. People don't really think about him in terms of what that means for sexuality, but he was very interested in time, and I looked at how what he says about time could be related to these issues. Also in people like William Faulkner, who William Faulkner, very much a lot of his work on time has to do with how family narratives are kind of like the genealogy, where fathers are kind of responding to sons are responding to their father's histories, and so it's very much about kind of parents and children, and what does it mean to kind of think outside of that really kind of normative idea of genealogy that is passed from fathers to sons to children, especially around kind of individuals who are outside of those family narratives, often because they've kind of been rejected from families based on their sexuality. So those are some of the things that I look at in that book, and I've been working on that for so long that it just feels like it's taken up my life for the last 10 years or so.
Wow. Commitment, man.
Yeah.
Love it.
I think school's the only thing I've done consecutively for 10 years. Kind of like,
Me too.
Yeah.
So,
But you're almost done.
Right?
Almost
Yeah. I mean, I just never left school, right? So
You're
like,
just like, I'm back.
I went straight. I know I'm not in school, but I've never been off of a university. I've never been outside of the academic calendar. Like, I don't know what life is like without a semester ending. No
Right.
idea.
Yeah.
Right. So in that sense, I'm probably like you all, because you've been in school your whole life, right?
Yeah.
exactly.
Just imagine, just add like 15 years onto this, and then you
Ooh. Let's move on.
I saw something on Facebook that was like, when you realize that the only thing that you've done successfully for a long period of time is school, or the only thing that you've done right in life is sleep. It's like, okay.
Relatable.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Those are my two talents also, school and sleep.
Yep.
Best thing.
I'm really good. Yep. What led you to want to come to UMW?
A job.
Always a perk.
You're right.
Yes.
No, I mean, I will say, it's really hard to get a job in academia, especially, I can't speak for other disciplines, I just know it's really hard in literature. Like in any given year, there's only 20 or 30 jobs in the whole country that like fit each person's period and area. So it's like I was applying for jobs for 20th century British literature, and there were only 20 jobs that year, and there are like 3, depending on where, there are hundreds of people applying to that. But I remember when the job ad came out for Mary Washington, I read about it and I was like, that's the kind of place I want to be at. I was actually a visiting professor at Gettysburg, which is a small liberal arts school, but it's private, and I like the small liberal arts feel. I really want to have relationships with my students where I can mentor them. I went to a big school and I barely knew my professors at all. And I've luckily been teaching at smaller schools while I've had the ability to get to know students. And so when I saw Mary Washington, for me it was the perfect mix because it was a state school. So it meant that it was a type of school that more people could afford to go to. Whereas Gettysburg was like more than $60,000 a year. So it meant that I was teaching a very specific group of students that could afford to do that. Whereas I wanted to be at a place that was more accessible than that, but still had the small classes and still, allowed me to have the sort of interactions that you get at one of those types of schools. And, and then when I was brought in for my campus interviews, I just, it really solidified that this was a great place to be, especially since I saw my colleagues and how they talked about their students and how they got to actually have relationships with their students. And I was like, okay, this is, once I saw that, it was, at the top of my list. This was the job that I wanted that year. And luckily it worked out, so.
Yeah.
How long have you been at Mary Washington?
This is the end of my 5th year, so.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to say that was something that definitely drew me to Mary Washington too, because I didn't want to. I have family members who went to schools with 46,000 people, and I didn't want to just be a number in a lecture hall.
Right.
I wanted to actually know my professors and be able to ask them questions and know them, and not be able to, or not be afraid to show up at office hours and be like, I know you don't know me, but
I'm pretty sure that was my essay topic, to get into Mary Washington. I'm not just another number.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that was my topic.
Yeah.
I love when I write letters of recommendations for students, I can say really specific things. I just wrote one for a student who actually ended up getting a full ride for a master's and for a PhD, so she was choosing between them, and I had so many classes with her, and she had done research with me that I was able to really fill out this really robust statement about her. And I just know that none of my professors could have ever said that about me, because I was not able to be that close to them because I was a number. It was like terrifying to ask someone for a letter, because I'm like, yeah, I did well in your class, but do you even remember me?
Right.
You know?
Do you know my name?
Yeah.
Like if
Right.
I walked into your office, would you be like, hey,
Yeah.
number 62?
Right,
Or-
exactly.
Do you have a particular favorite class you like to teach at Mary Washington?
Oh, there's
I
a
know,
lot that
it's
I
a big
really
one,
like to
so,
teach.
yeah.
I mean, I can narrow it down to a few. I really like teaching queer literature because it's a 200 level class, and people take it for such varying reasons. I mean, it's a 200 level class, which means that it's not just English majors. And I think it serves a really important need for a lot of people who've never, if they identify as LGBT, have never seen themselves represented in stuff that was, coming into the classroom. Maybe that's less so now, but it's certainly for a lot of people, school systems are not even going to teach that because they're afraid of for example, with Fun Home, right? The controversy around that. A lot of schools have kind of gotten into trouble for making that the common read. So I really like teaching that class, and it also, we tend to form a really good rapport in that class and have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
I also really like to teach our methods class, English 295, because you introduce students to all these different types of theory that is applicable to literature, but across any, sort of object of analysis. So they read about, feminist theory and Marxist theory and deconstructionism, and all those ideas can be used and can be applied, in a vast variety of situations. I'm betting that even, that in communication, you use some of those same approaches, but with different, focuses. And then I also really like teaching senior seminars, because it's the place where you can really talk about the stuff that you've done the most research on. So you can really speak to your students, and because they're far enough along that you can speak to them as a scholar who you yourself are trying to figure things out, and they can see you negotiate those sorts of processes that they are doing in their papers as well, right? So that you can kind of talk about the trouble with writing and how hard writing is, how hard it is to begin writing, and what it means to kind of have this love-hate relationship with it. And that's the sort of thing that you can do with advanced students that you probably can't do when students are first and second years.
And it's in a smaller group too. I'm
Right.
assuming they're small
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Ours is
yeah.
12, 15 people.
Oh, yeah, so
that's our-
fantastic. You should know everyone real quick.
And
But they're great.
It's kind of like, in our seminar class, something that Dr. Johnson Young has said is that, this is kind of the time where we get to really bring everything together that we've done so far, and put it into one, into one final hurrah.
It's like the culminating
Hurrah.
experience of your education, right?
Yeah.
It's in your major, it's where it all comes together.
Yeah, which is kind of cool, because it's I haven't taken the time to think about this is what I've taken, this is what I've written, this is what I've done. It's just
Combining all those concepts.
Yeah.
And so with the, kind of the harshness towards humanities right now, and we do hear from potential students at UMW and their parents, why would you major in English? What's the utility of the humanities in English? What would you say to that?
Oh man,
What's your response?
I have so many answers. Okay, so
Yeah.
okay, let's just think about all of the different things that you can use English or humanities degree for. Right now, I don't know if you've been following this, but in terms of medical school, right, they're looking for medical applicants who are not biology majors. They actually are just major in something else and get these other skills and get the classes that you need. My sister-in-law is a doctor who is an English major. In terms of MCATs, people who have humanities degrees tend to do some of the best on MCATs. I mean, being a lawyer is all about language. It's all about reading the law, analyzing the law, and making arguments based on that. And that's what a humanities degree tells you to be. So, doctor, lawyer, we think of these as really high prestige jobs, but there's also, a whole variety of ways to do this. My brother works for nonprofits, and he said that, he's always looking for people in in humanities fields because they're trained to be problem solvers, right? So so many of the jobs that we have right now might not exist in the future. When you get into a job, they train you for that job, but what you really need are these overarching applicable skills. And I think that, if you go for a very specific type of degree, like the technology moves past that, right? Like very quickly. And some of those jobs are going to be automated. So the ability to think, problem solve, to write, to communicate, to deal with language is, at the core of so many different jobs. I also, my brother's best friend works at he does like some sorts of development. He says, he has people that do what he's always looking for are people to produce content.
Right. And
content is like, the ability to do that comes out of humanities, communication, all of these sorts of things. So I really think that, it sets you up from all different types of careers. I think it's one of the most versatile things that you can do because there's skills that they're applicable across a lot of different, disciplines.
I think this has been awesome, and I think it's so important to think about what other people study and do, and the important ways that you critique, the works that you look at. I'm excited about your book. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
What is the title of your book?
Well, they made me switch it because it's easier to search this way. But it's Literary Modernism, Queer Temporality, Eddies in Time.
Okay.
So eddies like eddies in a river.
Yeah.
Right. But it used to be Eddies in Time because usually it's like the evocative thing was often first, but now they want the descriptive thing first, so it's easier to search. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
So I had to switch it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it should be out June actually. So.